My name is Cassandra Mitchell, and I'm 26 years old. Right now, I'm lying in this hospital bed with an oxygen mask covering half my face, fighting for every breath after a drunk driver nearly killed me 3 days ago. My phone just buzzed with a text from my mother that made my blood run cold. The world would be a better place if you just disappeared forever. Stop being such a burden on everyone. While I'm literally fighting to survive, my own mother is telling me to die. That's when I knew I had to start recording everything, because nobody would believe the monster hiding behind her perfect mother facade. Before I tell you this story that will shock you to your core, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear how I exposed my family's twisted plan to inherit my money by any means necessary, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this journey gets darker than you can imagine. Trust me. You'll want to follow every twist and turn of how I survived not just a car accident, but a family determined to destroy me. Growing up in the wealthy suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My father, Dr. Robert Mitchell, was one of the most respected cardiovascular surgeons at Emory University Hospital, while my mother, Margaret, who insisted everyone call her Maggie, was the epitome of Southern Belle Society wife. She organized charity galas, hosted elaborate dinner parties, and always appeared immaculately dressed with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer outfits. Our sprawling colonial mansion on Peachtree Road was featured in Atlanta Homes magazine twice, and neighbors often commented on what a blessed family we were. But behind those pristine white columns and manicured gardens, a different story was unfolding. From my earliest memories, I noticed how differently my mother treated me compared to my younger brother Tyler. When Tyler brought home C's on his report card, Mom would ruffle his hair and say, "Boys will be boys." But when I brought home anything less than an A+, she'd launch into lectures about how I was disappointing the family and not living up to my potential. Tyler could leave his room messy for weeks, but if I left so much as a book on my desk, it'd get a 20-minute speech about being disorganized and careless. The manipulation was subtle but constant. During family dinners at our formal dining room table, Mom would make comments like, "Cassie, maybe you should consider a smaller portion," while piling Tyler's plate high with seconds. When I won the state science fair in 10th grade, her first response wasn't "Congratulations, but I hope this doesn't make you too proud." Sweetheart, pride comes before the fall. She had this way of twisting every achievement into a character flaw, every success into a reason for concern about my attitude. Dad was always working, pulling 14-hour days at the hospital, so he rarely witnessed these interactions. When I tried to tell him about Mom's comments, he'd dismiss my concerns with, "Your mother loves you, she just wants the best for you," before rushing off to another surgery or medical conference. He lived in his own world of operating rooms and patient charts, completely oblivious to the emotional warfare happening under his own roof. Tyler seemed to absorb Mom's favoritism like a sponge, developing an entitled attitude that grew worse each year. While I was expected to maintain perfect grades, participate in extracurriculars, and help with household responsibilities, Tyler coasted through school with minimal effort and zero accountability. Mom would actually brag to her friends about Tyler's natural intelligence and leadership potential while describing me as the studious one, in a tone that made academic achievement sound like a personality disorder. Despite the constant criticism, I threw myself into excelling at everything I attempted. I graduated valedictorian from Westminster Academy, earned a full scholarship to Georgia Tech's computer science program, and maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout college. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, smart enough, successful enough, maybe Mom would finally see my worth. But every achievement was met with new reasons why it wasn't quite good enough, or how I could have done better, or warnings about how success might go to my head. It was during my junior year of college that I first started recording our conversations on my phone. I'd begun to doubt my own memory of these interactions, wondering if maybe I was being too sensitive like Mom always claimed. But when I listened back to recordings of her berating me for 30 minutes about how my summer internship at Microsoft was probably just charity because they felt sorry for me, I realized I wasn't imagining the cruelty. Her words were calculated and deliberate, designed to chip away at my self-esteem while maintaining plausible deniability. The recordings revealed patterns I hadn't fully recognized before. Mom would wait until Dad and Tyler were out of the house to launch her most vicious attacks, ensuring there were never any witnesses to her behavior. She'd criticize everything from my appearance to my career choices to my friends, always framing her attacks as constructive feedback from someone who loves you. When I'd get upset, she'd accuse me of being overly emotional and unable to handle honest communication. Our family's public image was carefully curated through Mom's social media presence and community involvement. She'd post photos of our family at church, volunteer events, and holiday gatherings, always with captions about being blessed with such wonderful children. The comments would flood in about what a perfect family we were, how lucky Dad was to have such a devoted wife, how proud they must be of their accomplished children. If people only knew that behind those smiling photos were years of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse disguised as motherly concern. The financial control was another layer of manipulation I was only beginning to understand. While I'd earned a full academic scholarship, Mom still controlled access to my college fund for expenses like textbooks, housing, and food. She'd used this leverage to dictate everything from my course schedule to my social activities, threatening to cut off financial support if I didn't comply with her demands. Even though I was legally an adult, She'd managed to maintain control over nearly every aspect of my life through a combination of financial dependency and emotional manipulation. As I prepared to graduate and enter the workforce, I could sense Mom's anxiety about losing control over me. Her criticisms became more frequent and more personal, focusing on how I'd never survive in the real world without her guidance. She'd make comments about how employers would see through my act and how I'd come crawling back home when reality hit. But I was determined to prove her wrong and finally break free from the toxic cycle that had defined my entire childhood and adolescence. After graduating from Georgia Tech with highest honors, I landed my dream job as a senior software engineer at a rapidly growing fintech startup in downtown Atlanta. For the first time in my life, I was financially independent and living in my own apartment in Virginia Highland, 15 minutes away from my parents, but finally free from their daily control. I'd been working there for 2 years, building innovative payment processing systems and earning recognition from both colleagues and industry leaders. My salary was substantial enough that I could afford my own place, my own car, and my own choices without needing to justify every decision to Mom. The independence was intoxicating. I could eat what I wanted without commentary about my weight, wear clothes that I liked without criticism about my appearance, and pursue friendships without Mom's passive-aggressive remarks about my poor judgment in people. I'd even started dating someone amazing, a fellow engineer named David, who treated me with the respect and kindness I'd never experienced in my family. For the first time, I was beginning to understand what healthy relationships looked like, which only highlighted how toxic my upbringing had been. On March 15th, a Tuesday evening that started like any other, I was driving home from work along Interstate 85 when everything changed in an instant. I remember singing along to a Taylor Swift song on the radio, thinking about weekend plans with David, when suddenly there were headlights blazing directly toward me in my lane. A drunk driver had crossed the median and was heading straight for my Honda Civic at 70 miles per hour. The impact was devastating, crushing the entire front end of my car and sending me spinning across 3 lanes of traffic before slamming into the concrete barrier. The next thing I remember was waking up in the intensive care unit at Mercy General Hospital, with machines beeping around me and tubes running down my throat. My entire body felt like it was on fire, and I couldn't move my left leg at all. A nurse with kind eyes was adjusting something on one of my monitors when she noticed I was awake. She explained that I'd been unconscious for 36 hours following emergency surgery to repair internal bleeding in my abdomen and set multiple broken bones. The drunk driver had walked away with minor injuries, but my injuries were life-threatening and would require months of recovery. Dad arrived first, still wearing his surgical scrubs from the hospital where he'd been operating when he got the call. His face was pale and drawn with worry as he held my hand and explained the extent of my injuries. I had 4 broken ribs, a shattered left femur, a severe concussion, internal bleeding that had required 2 surgeries to repair, and extensive bruising throughout my torso. The doctors weren't sure yet if there would be permanent damage to my mobility or cognitive function. Dad's voice cracked as he told me how scared he'd been when he first saw me in the emergency room. Mom arrived 6 hours later, claiming she'd been at her book club and hadn't seen the messages until much later. But I later discovered through her social media posts that she'd actually been at a spa day with her friends, getting massages and facials while I fought for my life in surgery. Her first words to me weren't expressions of relief or love, but complaints about how inconvenient the timing was, since she and Dad had planned a weekend trip to their vacation home in Hilton Head. She seemed more annoyed by the disruption to her schedule than concerned about my condition. That first night in the hospital, as pain medication made me drift in and out of consciousness, my phone buzzed with a text message from Mom. Still groggy and disoriented, I managed to unlock my phone and read words that felt like another physical blow. "This is just like you to cause drama and ruin our vacation plans. I suppose you'll expect everyone to drop everything and cater to your needs now." I stared at the screen in disbelief, wondering if the head injury was making me hallucinate. But the message was real, sent from my mother while I lay in intensive care recovering from surgery. Over the next 48 hours, as my condition stabilized enough to move me from the ICU to a regular hospital room, I witnessed the most disturbing display of my mother's dual nature. When doctors, nurses, or visitors were present, she transformed into the perfect picture of a devoted mother. She'd hold my hand, speak in soothing tones about how brave I was being, and thank the medical staff profusely for taking such good care of her precious daughter. She'd post updates on Facebook asking for prayers for my recovery, sharing photos of herself looking distraught beside my hospital bed with captions about how blessed she felt that I had survived. But the moment we were alone, the mask would slip completely. She'd make comments about how the accident was probably caused by my reckless driving or my poor judgment. When I was clearly in excruciating pain despite the medication, she'd suggest that I was exaggerating for sympathy or milking the situation for attention. She complained constantly about the inconvenience of having to visit the hospital, the cost of parking, and how my injuries were affecting the family's reputation in their social circle. The text messages became relentless and increasingly cruel. "Stop acting like you're dying, it's embarrassing. The whole family is tired of your drama queen routine. Maybe this accident will teach you some humility." Each message felt like poison being injected directly into my emotional wounds while my physical wounds were trying to heal. I began to understand that my mother wasn't just lacking empathy. She was actively enjoying my suffering and using it as an opportunity to inflict maximum psychological damage while I was at my most vulnerable. Tyler visited exactly once, staying for 15 minutes before claiming he had to get back to his law school studies. He spent most of the visit checking his phone and complaining about Atlanta traffic, rather than showing any concern for my condition. When I tried to talk to him about Mom's behavior, he dismissed my concerns with, "You know how Mom gets when she's stressed, and maybe if you hadn't been so independent lately, she wouldn't be so hurt." It became clear that Tyler had been thoroughly programmed to see me as the problem and Mom as the long-suffering victim. My best friend Rachel was the only family member who showed genuine concern and support. She'd known me since college and had witnessed enough of my family dynamics to understand that something was seriously wrong with how they were handling my crisis. When I showed her some of Mom's text messages, her face went white with shock and anger. She immediately started researching resources for documenting emotional abuse and connecting me with legal advocates who specialized in family manipulation cases. Rachel became my lifeline to sanity during those dark, early days of recovery. It was Rachel who suggested that I start systematically documenting everything Mom was doing and saying. She helped me set up a secure cloud storage system where I could back up recordings, screenshots, and written accounts of each incident. We created a detailed timeline of events and began building what would eventually become a comprehensive case file of evidence. Rachel understood that my family's behavior wasn't normal grief or stress. It was calculated emotional abuse designed to break me down when I was already broken physically. The insurance battles began almost immediately, and I quickly discovered that Mom was actively working to limit my access to the best possible medical care. She'd call my insurance company claiming to speak on my behalf, questioning whether certain treatments were really necessary, and suggesting that I was probably exaggerating my symptoms. When specialists recommended additional surgeries or extended physical therapy, Mom would research ways to appeal those recommendations or find cheaper alternatives. Her primary concern seemed to be minimizing costs rather than maximizing my recovery. As word of my accident spread through our extended family and social circle, I began to realize how thoroughly Mom had already begun controlling the narrative. She was telling people that my injuries were minor and that I was milking the situation for attention. She'd framed my need for assistance and medical care as evidence of my dependent personality and inability to handle adversity like an adult. Anyone who called to check on me was getting a carefully crafted story designed to minimize sympathy for my situation while positioning Mom as the real victim of my drama. The most chilling moment came during my second week in the hospital when I overheard Mom on a phone call with someone, discussing my situation in terms that made it clear she viewed my accident as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. She was talking about how this might actually work out for the best, and how some people need to learn lessons the hard way. The callousness in her voice, as she discussed my near-death experience like it was a convenient teaching tool, revealed a level of cruelty that I was only beginning to fully understand. As days turned into weeks in the hospital, Mom's text message campaign escalated from cruel to absolutely vicious, revealing a level of hatred that took my breath away even more than my physical injuries. The messages came at all hours. Early morning when I was trying to rest, late at night when pain kept me awake, and especially during moments when I was struggling most with my recovery. Each notification on my phone became a source of dread, knowing it was likely another verbal assault from the woman who was supposed to love me unconditionally. The content of these messages was so shocking that I began screenshotting every single one, creating a digital archive of cruelty that would have been impossible to believe without proof. "You've always been a disappointment, but this attention-seeking behavior is a new low. I wish I never had you. You've brought nothing but problems to this family. Stop expecting everyone to feel sorry for you. Accidents happen to careless people. The world would be better off if you just disappeared and stopped being such a burden." Each message was carefully crafted to inflict maximum emotional damage while maintaining enough ambiguity that she could claim she was just trying to motivate me if anyone questioned her methods. What made the messages even more disturbing was their timing in relation to my medical condition. On days when I had particularly difficult procedures or setbacks in my recovery, the messages became more frequent and more savage. When doctors discovered complications that required additional surgery, Mom's response wasn't concern but irritation about more drama and expense. When physical therapy sessions left me exhausted and discouraged, she'd text about how I was giving up too easily and embarrassing the family with my weakness. It was as if she had some kind of radar for my most vulnerable moments and used them as opportunities to attack. Meanwhile, her social media presence told a completely different story that made my blood boil every time I saw it. She'd post photos of flower arrangements she'd allegedly sent to my hospital room, though I never received any flowers from her. She'd share inspirational quotes about standing by family in difficult times and the power of a mother's love. Her Facebook posts painted her as a devoted mother, spending every waking moment at my bedside, praying for my recovery and thanking God for keeping her precious daughter alive. The comments sections were filled with friends and acquaintances praising her strength and devotion, completely unaware of the psychological warfare she was waging against me privately. The contrast between her public persona and private behavior was so extreme that I began to question my own sanity, wondering if maybe I was misinterpreting her intentions due to my head injury or pain medication. But the evidence was undeniable. Screenshots of messages sent within minutes of her posting about what a blessing I was to the family. She'd literally post about holding my daughter close during this difficult time, while simultaneously texting me that I was a burden who should have died in the accident. The calculated nature of this dual behavior revealed a level of psychological manipulation that was truly terrifying. The manipulation extended far beyond just me to our extended family members, who began treating me differently based on whatever story Mom had told them. My Aunt Sarah, who had always been close to me, suddenly became distant and cold during her hospital visit. When I tried to tell her about Mom's behavior, she looked at me with suspicion and suggested that head injuries can sometimes affect judgment and memory. Apparently, Mom had already planted seeds about my confusion and emotional instability following the accident, preemptively discrediting anything I might say about her treatment of me. My Uncle Jim, Dad's brother, visited once and spent most of the time questioning whether I really needed to be in the hospital so long and suggesting that I should be pushing myself harder to recover more quickly. He made comments about how young people today expect everything handed to them and how a little adversity builds character. It became obvious that Mom had been feeding him stories about my supposed lack of resilience and work ethic, turning what should have been a support system into another source of judgment and criticism. The insurance battles intensified as Mom began actively interfering with my medical care in ways that could have seriously compromised my recovery. She called my insurance company multiple times, claiming to be acting on my behalf, and questioned the necessity of various treatments that my doctors had recommended. When I needed specialized physical therapy to regain full use of my left leg, she argued with the insurance representatives about whether such expensive treatment was really required for someone my age, who should be able to heal naturally. Her interference delayed approval for critical treatments and added weeks to my recovery timeline. Even more disturbing was her attempt to influence my medical team directly. She'd corner doctors and nurses when I was asleep or getting tests, sharing her concerns about my tendency toward drama and suggesting that I might be exaggerating symptoms for attention. She'd frame these conversations as those of a worried mother trying to ensure her daughter got appropriate rather than excessive care. But the effect was to plant doubt about the legitimacy of my complaints and needs. Several times, I noticed medical staff treating me with less urgency or compassion following these conversations with Mom. The psychological warfare extended to my professional life as well. Mom somehow obtained contact information for my supervisor at work and called to update him on my condition, sharing her assessment that I was milking the situation and would likely try to extend my medical leave unnecessarily. She suggested that the company should be prepared for me to use my injuries as an excuse for poor performance once I returned to work. When my supervisor mentioned this call during one of his check-ins with me, I was horrified to realize how far Mom was willing to go to sabotage my life and reputation. Rachel continued to be my anchor during this period, helping me document each incident and building what was becoming an overwhelming case file of evidence. She'd visit daily and witness firsthand how Mom's behavior would change the moment she walked into the room. During one visit, Rachel was hiding in the bathroom when Mom arrived and heard her berate me for 10 minutes about being a burden on everyone, before immediately switching to sweet maternal tones when she heard Rachel's footsteps returning. Rachel was able to record parts of these interactions on her phone, providing crucial audio evidence of Mom's manipulative behavior. The most heartbreaking aspect of this period was realizing how thoroughly Tyler had been turned against me. His rare phone calls were filled with criticism about how I was making everything about myself and putting unnecessary stress on Mom and Dad. He'd accused me of being selfish for requiring so much medical attention and suggests that I should be more grateful for the family's support rather than complaining constantly. It became clear that Mom had been feeding him a steady diet of lies about my behavior and attitude, turning my own brother into another weapon in her psychological arsenal. During my 4th week in the hospital, when complications from my internal injuries required an additional surgery, Mom's response revealed the true depths of her callousness. Instead of offering comfort or support, she sent a series of texts blaming me for not taking care of yourself properly and causing more expense and inconvenience for everyone. She actually suggested that I was probably causing these complications on purpose to get more attention and sympathy. The idea that she believed I would deliberately harm myself for attention showed how distorted her perception of reality had become, or how committed she was to painting me as the villain in every scenario. The nursing staff began to notice the pattern of my distress following Mom's visits, and several nurses discreetly asked if everything was okay at home. One particularly observant nurse, Linda, mentioned that she'd noticed my mother seemed more concerned with hospital policies than with your comfort, and that my vital signs always showed elevated stress levels after her visits. When I broke down and showed Linda some of the text messages, her professional demeanor cracked, and she looked genuinely shocked at the cruelty. She documented her observations in my medical chart and suggested that I might want to consider restricting Mom's access to my medical information. Everything changed during my 6th week of recovery when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation that revealed the true motive behind Mom's escalating cruelty. I'd been dozing in my hospital bed when I heard her voice in the hallway outside my room, speaking in hushed but urgent tones to someone on the phone. What I heard next made my blood run cold and explained everything about her behavior since the accident. She was discussing plans to have me declared mentally incompetent and gain control over what she called the inheritance situation before I was fully recovered and able to cause problems. The inheritance she was referring to belonged to my beloved grandmother, my father's mother, who had passed away 18 months earlier. Grandma Rose had been the one person in my extended family who truly understood and loved me unconditionally. Shed witnessed Mom's treatment of me over the years and had grown increasingly concerned about the family dynamics she observed. In her will, Grandma Rose had left her substantial estate to me, rather than to Dad or splitting it among family members, specifically noting her desire to ensure I had the independence and security that every young woman deserves. The estate was worth approximately $2.8 million, including Grandma Rose's beautiful antebellum home in Savannah, a portfolio of blue-chip stocks and bonds, and several rental properties that generated significant monthly income. At the time of her death, I'd been told the inheritance was tied up in probate and would be available when I turned 30. I'd never questioned this timeline or investigated the legal details, trusting that Dad and his lawyers were handling everything appropriately. Now I was beginning to suspect that there might be more to the story than what I'd been told. From the fragments of conversation I could hear, Mom was discussing strategies for challenging Grandma Rose's will on the grounds that I was mentally unstable and incapable of managing significant financial assets responsibly. She mentioned something about how my emotional problems and dependency issues could be documented by medical professionals who would testify that I lacked the capacity to handle such a large inheritance. The accident and my subsequent medical treatment were being positioned as evidence of my supposed incompetence and poor judgment. Even more disturbing was her discussion of bribing certain medical professionals to provide assessments that would support their case for having me declared incompetent. She mentioned specific dollar amounts and talked about doctors who might be willing to interpret my head injury and emotional state in ways that would benefit their legal strategy. The casual way she discussed corrupting medical ethics and legal proceedings revealed a level of calculation and determination that was absolutely terrifying. This wasn't just about money. It was about completely destroying my autonomy and independence. The conversation also revealed Tyler's active participation in this scheme, which explained his sudden coldness and criticism over the past several weeks. Apparently, Mom had promised him a significant portion of the inheritance if he supported their legal challenge and testified about my supposed mental instability. Tyler's gambling debts from law school were much worse than anyone realized, and he owed substantial money to some very dangerous people. Mom was using his desperation to buy his cooperation in what amounted to a conspiracy to steal my rightful inheritance. I learned that they'd already consulted with several attorneys about the feasibility of their challenge, shopping for legal representation that would be willing to pursue such an ethically questionable case. They'd found a lawyer named Harrison Blackwell who specialized in contested estate proceedings and had a reputation for winning cases through aggressive tactics and questionable methods. Blackwell had apparently assured them that with the right medical documentation and family testimony, they could successfully argue that Grandma Rose's will should be overturned based on my alleged incompetence. The legal strategy involved several coordinated elements that demonstrated months of planning and preparation. First, they would establish a pattern of concerning behavior dating back to my college years, painting my academic focus and career ambition as signs of obsessive-compulsive tendencies and inability to maintain healthy relationships. My independence and financial success would be reframed as reckless individualism and poor judgment in personal relationships. Even my recovery from the accident would be positioned as evidence of attention-seeking behavior and manipulation of medical professionals. Dad's involvement in this scheme was perhaps the most devastating betrayal of all. While he maintained a facade of caring concern during hospital visits, he was actually providing Mom with access to my confidential medical records and psychological evaluations. As a prominent physician, he had connections throughout the medical community that Mom was leveraging to find doctors willing to provide the assessments they needed. Dad was also using his professional reputation to legitimize their claims about my supposed mental health issues, lending medical credibility to what was essentially a fraud. The financial pressures driving their desperation became clearer as I listened to more of their planning conversations over the following days. Dad's medical practice was in serious financial trouble due to several malpractice lawsuits and poor investment decisions. They'd mortgaged their house multiple times and were facing potential bankruptcy within the next year. Tyler's gambling debts were approaching six figures and had been threatened with serious physical harm if he didn't pay up soon. My inheritance represented their only hope of avoiding complete financial ruin, but there was an even darker element to their scheme that I discovered when Rachel helped me investigate the legal documents that already filed. They weren't just planning to challenge the will, they were actively working to have me declared permanently incompetent, which would allow them to control all aspects of my life indefinitely. This included medical decisions, living arrangements, financial management, and even personal relationships. They were essentially planning to have me legally declared incapable of living independently, turning me into a ward of their control for the rest of my life. The medical manipulation became more obvious once I understood their ultimate goal. Mom's interference with my treatment wasn't just cruelty. It was a deliberate attempt to prolonging my recovery and create evidence of my supposed inability to make sound decisions about my own care. Every delay in my healing, every complication that arose from inadequate treatment, every moment of confusion or emotional distress was being documented as proof that I lacked the mental capacity to manage my own affairs. I also discovered that they'd been systematically turning family, friends, and business associates against me, sharing carefully crafted stories about my deteriorating mental state and concerning behavior patterns. Mom had been hosting coffee dates and lunch meetings where she'd tearfully confide her worries about my psychological health and my ability to function independently. She'd paint herself as a devoted mother struggling to cope with a daughter who was spiraling out of control and needed serious intervention for my own safety. The conspiracy extended to my professional life in ways that could have permanently destroyed my career prospects. Mom had contacted not just my current supervisor but also several colleagues and industry contacts, expressing her concerns about my mental stability and suggesting that I might not be reliable for important projects or professional responsibilities. She was systematically destroying my reputation in the tech industry, making it virtually impossible for me to return to my career, even after my physical recovery was complete. Tyler's role in this scheme was particularly painful because I could see how thoroughly Mom had manipulated his desperation and greed to turn him against me. She'd convinced him that I was somehow stealing his rightful inheritance and that Grandma Rose had been unfairly influenced in her decision-making. Tyler genuinely believed that he was the victim in this situation and that challenging the will was a matter of correcting an injustice rather than perpetrating one. Mom had played on his financial desperation and sense of entitlement to transform him into a willing accomplice. The timeline for their legal challenge was aggressive, with plans to file formal competency proceedings within the next month while I was still physically and emotionally vulnerable from the accident. They were counting on my weakened state to make it difficult for me to mount an effective defense, and they'd timed their strategy to coincide with the period when I'd be most dependent on family support and least able to advocate for myself. It was a calculated attack, designed to catch me at my absolute lowest point and overwhelm me before I could recover enough strength to fight back. 3 days after overhearing Mom's phone conversation about the inheritance scheme, something happened that moved their campaign from psychological warfare into attempted murder. I woke up that Tuesday morning feeling stronger than I had in weeks, with doctors optimistic that I might be discharged within the next few days to continue my recovery at home. My appetite had finally returned, and I was looking forward to eating something more substantial than hospital food. That's when Mom arrived with what she claimed was homemade chicken soup, one of my favorites from childhood, that she'd specially prepared to help with my recovery. The soup arrived in an elegant ceramic container that Mom made a big show of presenting to me, complete with matching silverware and a cloth napkin. She fussed over arranging everything perfectly on my bedside table, while talking about how she'd spent hours in the kitchen preparing this special meal as a gesture of her love and concern. She even took photos of herself feeding me the first few spoonfuls, posting them on social media with captions about a mother's love knows no bounds, and nothing beats homemade soup when you're not feeling well. The soup tasted delicious, with rich chicken broth and tender vegetables that reminded me of childhood comfort foods. I ate nearly the entire bowl while Mom sat beside my bed, watching me with what I thought was loving concern but now realize was anticipation. She kept encouraging me to finish every drop because she'd put so much love into making it perfect. About 20 minutes after finishing the meal, I began to feel strange sensations that I initially attributed to eating solid food after weeks of hospital diet restrictions. The first symptoms were subtle: a tingling sensation in my throat and a feeling of warmth spreading through my chest. Within minutes, the tingling intensified into burning, and I began to have difficulty swallowing. My throat felt like it was closing up, and I started experiencing the familiar signs of anaphylactic shock that I'd learned to recognize from my severe shellfish allergy. The irony wasn't lost on me that Mom, who had fed me for 18 years and knew about my deadly allergy better than anyone, had somehow included shellfish in what was supposed to be a simple chicken soup. The reaction escalated rapidly from uncomfortable to life-threatening as my airways began to constrict and my blood pressure dropped dangerously low. I pressed the emergency button beside my bed while struggling to breathe, trying to communicate to the responding nurses that I was having an allergic reaction. Mom immediately jumped into action, playing the role of terrified mother perfectly, crying and asking what was happening to her precious daughter. She demanded that the medical team do everything possible to save me, while simultaneously providing them with detailed information about my medical history and allergies. The medical response was swift and professional, with nurses administering epinephrine and calling for emergency backup, while Mom continued her Oscar-worthy performance of maternal panic. She held my hand and whispered reassuring words, while I fought to stay conscious, telling me to stay strong and that everything would be okay. To any observer, she appeared to be a devoted mother watching her daughter struggle with a mysterious medical emergency, completely unaware of what had caused such a severe allergic reaction. Within minutes, my hospital room was filled with medical professionals working to stabilize my condition and prevent complete respiratory failure. The anaphylactic shock was severe enough to require multiple doses of epinephrine and continuous monitoring in the intensive care unit. As they wheeled me toward the ICU, I heard Mom tearfully telling the medical team that she had no idea what could have caused such a reaction, since she'd been so careful about my dietary restrictions when preparing the soup. During the critical first hour of treatment, while I drifted in and out of consciousness, I caught glimpses of Mom in the hallway speaking with doctors about my condition. Even through my medicated haze, something seemed wrong about her demeanor. She appeared more satisfied than distressed, more relieved than worried. When she thought no one was looking, I saw her check her phone with what looked like anticipation rather than anxiety. The expression on her face was completely inconsistent with a mother whose daughter had nearly died from anaphylactic shock. Once my condition stabilized and I was able to think clearly again, I began to piece together the suspicious circumstances surrounding this accidental poisoning. Mom had known about my shellfish allergy for over 20 years, had witnessed multiple previous reactions, and had always been obsessively careful about checking ingredient labels and restaurant preparations. The idea that she would accidentally include shellfish in homemade soup was virtually impossible, especially given her meticulous nature when it came to cooking and meal preparation. Rachel arrived at the hospital within hours of hearing about my emergency, and her reaction to the situation confirmed my growing suspicions. She immediately questioned how such a severe allergic reaction could have occurred in a controlled hospital environment where my dietary restrictions were clearly documented. When I told her about the soup Mom had brought, Rachel's expression darkened with understanding. She'd witnessed Mom's obsessive attention to my allergy over the years and knew that such an accident was completely out of character. Acting on her suspicions, Rachel convinced the hospital staff to preserve samples of the remaining soup for testing, arguing that understanding the source of the allergic reaction was crucial for preventing future incidents. She also requested that security footage from the hospital corridors be preserved, claiming that reviewing my visitors and activities might help identify the trigger for my reaction. Her quick thinking and advocacy on my behalf proved crucial for building evidence of what I was beginning to suspect was an attempted murder. The test results from the soup samples came back within 48 hours and confirmed our worst suspicions. The soup contained significant traces of shellfish extract that had been deliberately incorporated into the broth during cooking. This wasn't cross-contamination from shared cooking surfaces or accidental inclusion of shellfish ingredients. The concentration levels indicated intentional addition of shellfish stock or extract to the otherwise simple chicken soup. The forensic evidence was clear that someone had purposely poisoned the soup with substances they knew would trigger my deadly allergy. Security footage from the hospital parking garage and corridors provided additional disturbing evidence of Mom's behavior before and after delivering the soup. The cameras captured her sitting in her car for nearly 15 minutes before entering the hospital, appearing to be having an intense phone conversation while repeatedly checking her watch. After leaving my room following the allergic reaction, she was filmed making another phone call in the hospital stairwell, and her body language suggested excitement rather than distress about what had just occurred. Most damning of all was audio from her conversation with Tyler that security cameras inadvertently captured in the hospital lobby after my emergency treatment. She was telling him that the plan was working perfectly and that this should speed up the timeline significantly. She mentioned something about how my obvious mental instability following this incident would provide additional evidence for their competency challenge. The casual way she discussed nearly killing me as a strategic advantage in their legal case revealed a level of evil that I could barely comprehend. The medical team's investigation into the incident uncovered additional suspicious elements of Mom's behavior that they'd initially attributed to maternal concern. Several nurses reported that Shed seemed unusually interested in the specific timing of my meals and medication schedule in the days leading up to the poisoning. Shed asked detailed questions about my allergy protocol and emergency response procedures, claiming she wanted to be prepared in case of an emergency during her visits. Now these questions appeared to be reconnaissance for planning the attack. Dr. Martinez, my primary physician, was particularly troubled by Mom's behavior during the emergency response to my allergic reaction. While most family members become visibly distressed and require support during medical crises, Mom had remained unusually calm and collected, asking specific medical questions that seemed designed to understand the severity of my condition rather than expressing emotional concern for my well-being. Her clinical interest in my near-death experience struck multiple medical professionals as inappropriate and concerning. The poisoning attempt had several strategic benefits for Mom's inheritance scheme beyond just potentially killing me. If I had died, the inheritance would have reverted to Dad as the next of kin, giving them immediate access to the money they desperately needed. If I survived but suffered permanent cognitive damage from oxygen deprivation during anaphylactic shock, it would provide perfect evidence for their competency challenge. Even my survival without lasting damage served their purposes by demonstrating my reckless disregard for my own safety and poor judgment about food choices. Hospital social services became involved following the discovery of intentional poisoning, and I was assigned a patient advocate who specialized in cases involving suspected abuse or exploitation of vulnerable adults. The advocate, Maria Santos, had extensive experience with family financial abuse cases and immediately recognized the pattern of behavior that Mom was exhibiting. She helped me understand my rights as a patient and connected me with legal resources for protecting myself against further attempts at harm. The psychological impact of realizing that my own mother had tried to murder me was almost harder to process than the physical trauma of the poisoning itself. For 26 years, despite all her cruelty and manipulation, I'd never imagined that she was capable of actual violence against me. The discovery that she would literally try to kill me for money shattered any remaining illusions I had about the possibility of salvaging our relationship or finding some way to coexist peacefully with my family. The poisoning attempt marked a turning point where the full scope of my family's conspiracy began unraveling like a house of cards, revealing layers of deception and betrayal that went far deeper than I had ever imagined. Rachel's investigation into the incident had attracted the attention of Detective Sarah Chen from the Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, who specialized in cases involving elder abuse, inheritance fraud, and family exploitation schemes. Detective Chen immediately recognized the patterns of behavior that suggested this wasn't an isolated incident but part of a larger criminal conspiracy. Tyler's role in the scheme became crystal clear when Detective Chen obtained a warrant for his phone records and discovered months of text message exchanges with Mom planning various aspects of their campaign against me. The messages revealed that Tyler hadn't just been a passive beneficiary of their inheritance grab, had been an active participant from the beginning, helping to develop strategies for discrediting me and providing legal expertise on how to structure their competency challenge. His law school education was being used to help them navigate the legal system and find loopholes that would support their fraudulent claims. The financial pressure driving Tyler's desperation was worse than anyone had realized. His gambling addiction had led him to borrow money from several illegal bookmaking operations, and he owed over $200,000 to some extremely dangerous people who had already begun making threats against his physical safety. Text messages showed him begging Mom to speed up the timeline on their inheritance scheme because his creditors were demanding immediate payment. The urgency of his situation had pushed both of them toward increasingly desperate and dangerous measures. Detective Chen's investigation revealed that Tyler had been systematically documenting what he called evidence of my supposed mental instability for over a year, long before my accident had provided them with additional ammunition. Had been keeping detailed notes about my career choices, my decision to live independently, my dating relationships, and even my political opinions, framing all of these normal adult behaviors as signs of poor judgment and emotional instability. Head compiled this information into a formal report that they planned to submit as part of their competency challenge. Even more disturbing was the discovery that Tyler had been secretly recording our family interactions during holidays and gatherings, editing the recordings to remove context and make me appear unreasonable or unstable. Head captured moments when I defended myself against Mom's criticism, edited out her initial attacks, and presented my responses as evidence of unprovoked aggression and emotional volatility. These manipulated recordings were intended to support their narrative that I'd always been difficult and had been showing signs of mental deterioration for years. Dad's involvement in the conspiracy was the most devastating betrayal because I'd always believed that despite his emotional absence, he genuinely cared about my well-being and would protect me from serious harm. Detective Chen's investigation revealed that Dad had been using his medical connections to gather expert opinions about my supposed psychological issues, shopping for psychiatrists who would be willing to provide assessments supporting their competency challenge. Had been leveraging his professional reputation to lend credibility to their fraudulent medical claims. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Dad had been deliberately mismanaging Grandma Rose's estate, using the inheritance money to cover his mounting business debts and legal expenses from malpractice suits. Bank records showed that Head already spent over $800,000 of my inheritance on his own financial problems, leaving the estate significantly depleted. Their urgency about gaining legal control wasn't just about accessing the money, it was about covering up the fact that Dad had already stolen a substantial portion of it. Dad's medical practice was in much worse financial shape than anyone had known, with multiple malpractice lawsuits pending and several criminal investigations into billing fraud and insurance scams. His malpractice insurance had been canceled due to non-payment, leaving him personally liable for millions of dollars in potential damages. The medical board was also investigating complaints about his surgical competence, and he was facing possible license suspension or revocation. My inheritance represented his only hope of avoiding complete professional and financial ruin. The conspiracy extended beyond just my immediate family, to include several extended family members who had been recruited to support their competency challenge with testimony about my supposed mental health issues. Detective Chen discovered that Mom had been systematically contacting aunts, uncles, and family friends, sharing carefully crafted stories about my concerning behavior and my need for professional intervention. Shed convinced several relatives that challenging the inheritance was an act of love designed to protect me from my own poor judgment. My Aunt Sarah, who I'd always considered an ally, had been completely turned against me through Mom's manipulation campaign. Phone records showed dozens of conversations between them where Mom shared fabricated stories about my financial recklessness, inability to maintain relationships, and increasingly erratic behavior. Aunt Sarah had been convinced that I was spiraling out of control and that family intervention was necessary to prevent me from destroying myself with the inheritance money. Uncle Jim had been recruited to provide testimony about my supposed antisocial tendencies and disrespect for family values. based entirely on Mom's twisted interpretations of my normal desire for independence and privacy. Shed convinced him that my decision to live separately from the family and maintain some boundaries around family involvement in my personal life were signs of dangerous individualism and rejection of healthy family support systems. His military background made him particularly susceptible to Mom's arguments about discipline and respect for authority. The legal strategy they'd developed with attorney Harrison Blackwell was sophisticated and multi-pronged, designed to attack my competency from multiple angles simultaneously. They planned to argue that my head injury from the accident had exacerbated pre-existing mental health issues, making me incapable of managing financial affairs responsibly. The poisoning incident would be presented as evidence of my self-destructive behavior and inability to make safe choices about basic life activities like eating. Blackwell had apparently assured them that judges were often sympathetic to families seeking to protect vulnerable relatives from making poor financial decisions, especially when substantial assets were involved. Head coached them on how to present their case as a loving intervention rather than a money grab, emphasizing their concern for my well-being rather than their desire for financial control. The legal fees alone for this case were approaching 6 figures, money they were borrowing against the expectation of gaining control over my inheritance. The timeline for their legal challenge had been carefully coordinated with my recovery period to maximize their chances of success. They planned to file the competency petition during the window when I would be most physically and emotionally vulnerable, hoping to overwhelm me with legal proceedings before I had recovered enough strength to mount an effective defense. They were counting on my weakened state and medical bills to pressure me into accepting a settlement that would give them partial control over the inheritance. Detective Chen's investigation also revealed that they'd been researching legal precedents for similar cases, studying successful competency challenges to understand what types of evidence and expert testimony would be most persuasive. They'd found several cases where adult children had been declared incompetent based on combinations of medical issues, family testimony, and claims about financial irresponsibility. They were essentially using a legal template designed to steal inheritances from vulnerable family members. The most chilling discovery was evidence that this wasn't their first attempt at gaining control over family money through questionable means. Detective Chen found records suggesting that they'd been involved in similar disputes over Dad's parents' estates years earlier, using comparable tactics to challenge wills and gain control over assets that should have gone to other family members. My situation was just the latest in a pattern of financial exploitation that they'd perfected over decades. Phone records revealed that Mom had been coordinating with Tyler to time their various attacks for maximum psychological impact, deliberately targeting moments when I was most vulnerable or stressed. The poisoning attempt had been planned to coincide with my improving physical condition, when my discharge from the hospital would have forced them to find new ways to access and monitor me. They'd been treating my recovery like a military campaign, strategizing about tactics and timing to achieve their objective of total control. The conspiracy also involved attempts to isolate me from potential allies and support systems outside the family. Mom had been systematically contacting my friends and colleagues, sharing concerns about my mental state and suggesting that I might be unstable or unreliable. She'd been trying to destroy my professional and personal relationships to ensure that I'd have nowhere to turn for help when they launched their legal attack. The goal was to make me completely dependent on family support, which they could then leverage to coerce my cooperation with their plans. Armed with Detective Chen's investigation, findings, and months of documented evidence, I finally had the ammunition needed to fight back against my family's conspiracy, but I knew that winning this battle would require strategic thinking and careful planning rather than emotional reactions. Rachel helped me assemble a legal team that included not just estate attorneys but also specialists in elder abuse, fraud, and civil rights violations. We weren't just defending against their competency challenge. We were going on the offensive to expose their criminal behavior and protect other potential victims from similar schemes. My primary attorney, Jennifer Walsh, had 20 years of experience fighting inheritance fraud cases and immediately recognized the sophisticated nature of my family's conspiracy. She explained that cases like mine were unfortunately becoming more common as medical advances extended lifespans and created larger inheritances, making elderly relatives and their beneficiaries targets for family financial abuse. Jennifer's strategy involved not just defending my competency but also pursuing criminal charges and civil damages against everyone involved in the conspiracy. The evidence compilation process was overwhelming in its scope and complexity, involving thousands of text messages, dozens of audio recordings, medical records, financial documents, and witness statements. Rachel and I spent weeks organizing everything into a chronological timeline that clearly demonstrated the progression from psychological abuse to attempted murder, showing how each escalation was designed to support their ultimate goal of stealing my inheritance. The pattern of behavior was so clear and well documented that Jennifer called it one of the strongest cases she'd ever seen. Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychologist specializing in family abuse cases, conducted a comprehensive evaluation of my mental state and cognitive abilities to counter any claims about my supposed incompetency. Her assessment involved extensive testing, interviews, and review of my medical history, educational achievements, and professional accomplishments. Dr. Williams concluded that I showed no signs of cognitive impairment or mental illness, describing me as highly intelligent, emotionally stable, and fully capable of managing complex personal and financial affairs. The medical evidence supporting my competency was overwhelming, with multiple physicians testifying that my head injury had caused no lasting cognitive damage and that my emotional responses to family abuse were entirely appropriate and healthy. Dr. Martinez provided detailed testimony about Mom's suspicious behavior during my hospitalization, including her interference with my medical care and her inappropriately clinical interest in my emergency treatment following the poisoning attempt. The medical consensus was that I was a victim of deliberate harm rather than someone incapable of caring for myself. Jennifer's team also assembled a group of character witnesses who could testify about my professional competence, personal responsibility, and emotional stability throughout my adult life. My supervisor at work provided testimony about my exceptional performance, leadership abilities, and sound judgment in high-pressure situations involving millions of dollars in financial transactions. Former professors from Georgia Tech described my academic excellence and mature decision-making throughout college. Friends and colleagues painted a picture of someone who was not only competent but exemplary in personal and professional responsibilities. The financial investigation into Dad's mismanagement of the estate provided crucial evidence for pursuing criminal charges beyond just the inheritance fraud. Forensic accountants discovered that had been systematically stealing from the estate for over 2 years, using Grandma Rose's money to cover his business debts, legal expenses, and personal lifestyle costs. The total theft exceeded $1.2 million, representing nearly half of the original inheritance value. This wasn't just inheritance fraud, it was grand theft and breach of fiduciary duty on a massive scale. Tyler's gambling debts provided additional leverage for our legal strategy, as his creditors were themselves engaged in illegal activities that could be prosecuted separately. Detective Chen worked with federal authorities to investigate the bookmaking operations that Tyler owed money to, discovering connections to organized crime and money laundering schemes. Tyler's desperation to pay these debts had made him vulnerable to criminal charges beyond just the inheritance conspiracy, potentially facing federal racketeering charges for his involvement with illegal gambling operations. The social media evidence proved particularly damaging to Mom's credibility, as her posts about being a devoted mother were directly contradicted by the timestamps on her cruel text messages to me. Jennifer's team created a side-by-side timeline showing her public proclamations of love and support occurring simultaneously with her private campaigns of psychological terrorism. The contrast was so stark that it clearly demonstrated the calculated nature of her public persona and the deliberate cruelty of her private behavior. Hospital security footage provided visual evidence that supported all of our claims about Mom's suspicious behavior before and after the poisoning attempt. The recordings showed her spending unusual amounts of time in her car making phone calls, her calm demeanor during my medical emergency, and her satisfied expression when discussing the incident with Tyler afterward. Expert testimony from behavioral analysts confirmed that her body language and facial expressions were completely inconsistent with genuine maternal concern and grief. The legal strategy involved filing multiple simultaneous actions to overwhelm my family's ability to respond effectively, while protecting me from further harm. We filed criminal charges for attempted murder, inheritance fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy, while also pursuing civil lawsuits for emotional distress, financial damages, and punitive awards. We requested immediate injunctions to prevent further contact with me and to freeze all remaining estate assets to prevent additional theft. Media attention became a crucial component of our strategy, as public exposure would prevent my family from continuing their manipulation campaigns and would protect me from further retaliation attempts. Rachel's journalist friend, investigative reporter Michael Torres, had been following the case and was prepared to publish a detailed exposé of the conspiracy once legal proceedings were underway. The story would serve as both a deterrent to my family and a warning to other potential victims of similar schemes. The protection measures we implemented were comprehensive, including changing all of my personal contact information, obtaining restraining orders against all family members, and arranging for security monitoring of my apartment and workplace. Detective Chen coordinated with hospital security to ensure my safety during continued medical appointments and physical therapy sessions. We also implemented cybersecurity measures to prevent my family from accessing my personal accounts or monitoring my communications. Jennifer's team worked with victim advocacy organizations to connect me with support services for survivors of family abuse, including counseling specifically designed for inheritance, fraud victims, and support groups for people who had experienced similar betrayals. The psychological impact of discovering that my entire family had conspired to harm me required specialized treatment from professionals who understood the unique trauma of financial and emotional exploitation by loved ones. The evidence preservation process involved creating multiple backup copies of all documentation and storing them with different legal firms and law enforcement agencies to prevent tampering or destruction. We also implemented ongoing monitoring systems to document any additional attempts at contact or retaliation by family members. Every interaction was being recorded and logged as potential evidence for additional criminal charges or civil damages. Public records research revealed that my family's conspiracy had involved numerous potential violations of state and federal laws, including mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, assault with intent to cause bodily harm, and violation of fiduciary duties. The scope of criminal exposure was so extensive that Jennifer recommended coordinating with federal prosecutors who had more resources for complex financial crime investigations. The counterattack strategy also involved protecting other potential victims who might be targeted by my family's future schemes. We shared information with adult protective services and local law enforcement about the tactics they'd used, helping to create awareness about warning signs of family financial abuse. Jennifer's firm used our case as an example in legal education seminars about inheritance fraud, helping other attorneys recognize and combat similar schemes. Expert witness preparation involved assembling testimony from specialists in psychology, forensic accounting, medical ethics, family dynamics, and criminal behavior analysis. Each expert would provide specific testimony about different aspects of the conspiracy, building a comprehensive case that left no room for doubt about my family's criminal intentions and behavior. The combined weight of professional opinion would make it virtually impossible for them to maintain their claims about my supposed incompetency or their own innocent intentions. The moment Michael Torres published his investigative article titled, "A Family's Deadly Greed: How a Mother Tried to Murder Her Daughter for an Inheritance in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution," the public explosion was immediate and devastating for my family's carefully constructed reputation. Within hours, the story had been picked up by national news outlets, social media influencers, and true crime podcasts, spreading across the internet like wildfire as people expressed shock and outrage at the brazen cruelty documented in the case. The evidence was so overwhelming and well documented that there was no room for doubt about what had really happened. Mom's social media accounts, which had been filled with her fake posts about being a devoted mother, became battlegrounds of public condemnation as thousands of people commented with disgust and disbelief. Her Facebook profile was flooded with angry messages from strangers who had read the article and seen through her manipulation campaign. Screenshots of her cruel text messages to me while I was hospitalized were being shared across multiple platforms, creating a permanent record of her heartless behavior that would follow her forever. The Atlanta social community that had once embraced Mom as the perfect Southern hostess now turned against her with the fury of people who felt personally deceived by her performance. Women who had attended her charity events and considered her a friend began sharing their own stories about uncomfortable interactions they'd had with her, describing moments when her mask had slipped and they'd glimpsed the cruelty underneath. The consensus emerged that many people had sensed something was wrong with her, but had dismissed their instincts out of politeness and social convention. Dad's medical practice imploded within days of the story breaking, as patients canceled appointments and refused to trust their lives to someone who had been willing to participate in such a calculated conspiracy against his own daughter. The medical board expedited their investigation into his conduct, and several hospitals began reviewing his privileges and questioning his professional competence. His reputation as a skilled surgeon was permanently destroyed by revelations about his willingness to corrupt medical ethics for financial gain. Tyler's situation became even more desperate as his law school learned about his involvement in the conspiracy and began disciplinary proceedings that would likely result in his expulsion and permanent ban from practicing law. His gambling creditors, emboldened by the negative publicity, escalated their collection efforts and began making public threats about what would happen if he didn't pay his debts immediately. The media attention had actually made his situation more dangerous by exposing his financial desperation to people who had no qualms about using violence to collect money. The community response included organizing support for me, while simultaneously ostracizing my family from social, professional, and charitable organizations they had been involved with for decades. The country club where they had been members for 20 years revoked their membership, citing conduct unbecoming. The hospital board removed Dad from several prestigious committees, and the medical society where he had held leadership positions asked for his immediate resignation. Detective Chen's investigation expanded as other potential victims came forward after reading about the case in the media. She discovered that my family had been involved in similar financial schemes targeting elderly relatives and vulnerable family members for over a decade. Two other inheritance disputes from previous years began to look much more suspicious when examined in light of the tactics they'd used against me. Additional criminal charges were filed as the full scope of their fraudulent activities became clear. The legal proceedings moved rapidly once the evidence became public, as my family's attorneys began advising them to accept plea bargains rather than face trial with such overwhelming evidence against them. Harrison Blackwell, the lawyer who had been helping them plan the competency challenge, withdrew from their case and began cooperating with prosecutors to avoid his own criminal charges for conspiracy and fraud. His cooperation provided additional evidence about their planning and intentions. Tyler broke first under the pressure, agreeing to testify against Mom and Dad in exchange for a reduced sentence and protection from his gambling creditors through the Witness Protection Program. His confession provided crucial details about the planning phases of their conspiracy, including recorded conversations where Mom explicitly discussed her willingness to kill me to access the inheritance money. His testimony removed any possibility that they could claim the poisoning attempt was accidental. The financial reckoning was swift and comprehensive, as courts froze all of my family's assets pending resolution of the criminal and civil cases. Their house was seized as evidence of Dad's theft from the estate, and their personal bank accounts were emptied to begin restitution for the money they'd stolen from my inheritance. The lifestyle they'd maintained through fraudulent means evaporated overnight, leaving them facing bankruptcy in addition to criminal charges. Mom's arrest was captured by news cameras as she was led away from their house in handcuffs, and the image became a symbol of justice for other abuse survivors who had followed the case. Her booking photo, showing her without the careful makeup and styling that had maintained her perfect appearance, revealed the harsh reality behind her constructed image. The woman who had terrorized me for years suddenly looked small and pathetic as she faced the consequences of her actions. The trial phase proceeded rapidly due to the overwhelming evidence and Tyler's cooperation as a prosecution witness. Mom's defense team attempted to argue that she was suffering from mental illness that had affected her judgment, but psychiatric evaluations concluded that she was fully competent and had acted with deliberate malice throughout the conspiracy. The poisoning attempt was ruled to be premeditated, attempted murder based on the evidence of her research into my allergies and the deliberate inclusion of shellfish in the soup. Dad's professional licenses were permanently revoked by the medical board following his conviction for theft and fraud, ending his career and ensuring he could never again use his medical credentials to exploit vulnerable people. His malpractice insurance had already been canceled, leaving him personally liable for millions in damages from pending lawsuits. The combination of criminal penalties and civil liability essentially guaranteed that he would remain in debt for the rest of his life. The civil damages awarded to me were substantial, including compensation for emotional distress, medical expenses, lost income, and punitive damages designed to deter similar behavior by others. The total award exceeded $3 million, which was in addition to the recovery of my original inheritance plus interest and penalties. The financial judgment ensured that my family would never recover from the consequences of their greed and cruelty. Public speaking opportunities began emerging as advocacy organizations invited me to share my story at conferences about financial abuse, family exploitation, and inheritance fraud. My experience became a case study used in legal education, social work training, and elder abuse prevention programs. The detailed documentation we had compiled became a template for other victims seeking to build cases against abusive family members. The media attention also connected me with other inheritance fraud survivors who had experienced similar betrayals by family members motivated by greed. Support networks emerged as people shared their stories and strategies for recovery, creating resources that hadn't existed before for this specific type of abuse. My case became a catalyst for broader conversations about family financial exploitation and the need for better legal protections for inheritance beneficiaries. Law enforcement agencies began using our case as training material for investigating family financial abuse, particularly the sophisticated manipulation tactics that abusers use to isolate victims and control narratives. Detective Chen became a sought-after speaker at conferences about investigating inheritance fraud and family exploitation schemes. The techniques WED used to document and preserve evidence became standard protocols for similar investigations. The lasting impact included legislative efforts to strengthen laws protecting inheritance beneficiaries from family exploitation and to improve reporting mechanisms for suspected financial abuse of vulnerable adults. Our case demonstrated the need for better coordination between medical professionals, legal advocates, and law enforcement when family abuse is suspected. Several states began reviewing their competency challenge procedures to prevent them from being weaponized by greedy family members. 2 years have passed since that terrible day when I lay in a hospital bed reading my mother's text telling me the world would be better if I disappeared, and the journey from victim to survivor has been more challenging and rewarding than I ever imagined possible. My physical recovery from the car accident was actually the easiest part. Bones heal, scars fade, and physical therapy eventually restored my full mobility and strength. The emotional healing from discovering that my entire family had conspired to harm me for money required a completely different kind of work that I'm still engaged in every day. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the trauma therapist who specializes in family abuse cases, helped me understand that grieving the family I thought I had was a necessary part of moving forward with my life. For 26 years, I'd believed that despite their flaws, my parents fundamentally loved me and wanted what was best for me. Learning that their concern was entirely performative and that they were capable of attempted murder for financial gain required me to reconstruct my entire understanding of my childhood, my relationships, and my own identity as their daughter. The therapy process involved not just processing the recent trauma but also re-examining decades of gaslighting, manipulation, and emotional abuse that I'd normalized as typical family dynamics. Dr. Martinez helped me recognize patterns of control and exploitation that had been present throughout my life, disguised as parental concern and family loyalty. Understanding these patterns was crucial for developing healthy relationships in the future and avoiding similar manipulation by others. Building new relationships based on genuine care and mutual respect has been one of the most healing aspects of my recovery journey. Rachel's friendship deepened into something more like sisterhood as she stood by me throughout the legal battles and continues to support my healing process. David, my boyfriend during the accident, initially struggled with the intensity of what I was going through but eventually became a crucial source of stability and unconditional love that helped me understand what healthy family relationships should look like. The chosen family I've built includes not just romantic and friendship relationships, but also professional mentors, therapy support groups, and other inheritance fraud survivors who understand the unique challenges of rebuilding life after such profound betrayal. These relationships are based on honesty, respect, and genuine care, rather than manipulation and control. The contrast with my biological family has been both healing and educational about what I deserve in all my relationships. Professional success has been an important part of reclaiming my identity and proving to myself that my family's assessment of my capabilities was completely wrong. I was promoted to senior engineering manager at my company, leading a team of 12 developers on innovative financial technology projects. My experience with documentation and evidence gathering during the legal case actually enhanced my professional skills in project management and quality assurance. I've become known for my attention to detail and systematic approach to complex problems. The financial settlement from the civil case, combined with my recovered inheritance and continued professional success, has provided security and independence that my family can never threaten again. I've used some of the money to establish a foundation that provides legal assistance to other inheritance fraud victims, helping people who lack the resources to fight back against family exploitation. The foundation has already helped dozens of people recover stolen inheritances and escape abusive family control. Speaking engagements at legal conferences, social work seminars, and victim advocacy events have become a meaningful way to transform my trauma into purpose and prevention. Sharing my story helps other people recognize warning signs of family financial abuse and provides hope for survivors who feel overwhelmed by the challenge of fighting back against family manipulation. The detailed documentation strategies we developed have been adopted by victim advocates and law enforcement agencies across the country. The criminal justice outcomes provided a sense of closure and vindication that was crucial for my healing process. Mom was sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted murder, inheritance fraud, and conspiracy, with additional time for the financial exploitation of elderly family members discovered during the investigation. Dad received 8 years for theft, fraud, and conspiracy, plus permanent prohibition from practicing medicine. Tyler received 3 years plus probation, with his cooperation in the prosecution preventing a longer sentence. Watching them face consequences for their actions was both satisfying and sad, as it represented the final end of any possibility of reconciliation or redemption for our family relationships. Their choices to prioritize money over love, control over respect, and greed over basic human decency had destroyed not just their own lives but also the family structure that could have provided support and connection for all of us. Their criminal behavior had consequences that extended far beyond just their victims, to include their own hopes for meaningful relationships and community respect. The ongoing impact of their choices continues to ripple through their lives in ways that extend beyond their prison sentences. Dad's medical malpractice cases proceeded despite his incarceration, resulting in judgments that will keep him in debt long after his release. Mom's social ostracization has been complete, with former friends and community members refusing any contact or communication. Tyler's law career is permanently destroyed, and his gambling creditors continue to pursue collection despite his imprisonment. Legal reforms inspired by our case have strengthened protections for inheritance beneficiaries in several states, making it more difficult for family members to weaponize competency challenges and requiring more rigorous evidence standards for claims about mental incapacity. These changes will protect future generations from similar exploitation and provide better resources for victims seeking justice against abusive family members. The personal growth I've experienced through this ordeal has been profound and unexpected, revealing inner strength and resilience I never knew I possessed. Being forced to advocate for myself against such overwhelming opposition taught me to trust my instincts, document everything, and never apologize for setting boundaries to protect my well-being. These skills have enhanced every aspect of my life, from professional relationships to personal friendships to romantic partnerships. Most importantly, I've learned that family is defined by love, respect, and mutual support rather than biology or legal relationships. The people who stood by me during the darkest period of my life, who believed my truth when others questioned it, and who continue to celebrate my successes and support my healing, those are my real family members, regardless of whether we share DNA. Blood relationships that are poisoned by abuse, manipulation, and exploitation are not worth preserving simply because of genetic connections. The foundation I established has grown beyond just inheritance fraud to address broader issues of family financial abuse, elder exploitation, and domestic economic violence. We provide legal assistance, counseling referrals, and practical support for people escaping financially abusive relationships with family members, romantic partners, or caregivers. The work has connected me with an entire community of survivors and advocates who are transforming their trauma into positive change for others. Looking forward, I'm optimistic about the life I'm building and the relationships I'm cultivating based on honesty, respect, and genuine care. The inheritance from Grandma Rose, which my family tried so hard to steal, has been used to create security and independence that allows me to pursue meaningful work and support causes I believe in. More importantly, it's given me the freedom to choose relationships based on love rather than necessity or family obligation. Sometimes people ask me if I miss my family or feel sad about the permanent estrangement from my parents and brother. The honest answer is that I grieve for the family I thought I had and the relationships I hoped were possible, but I don't miss the actual people who were willing to harm me for money. Missing them would be like missing an abusive relationship. It might feel familiar, but it was never healthy or beneficial for my well-being. The most powerful lesson from this experience is that recording the truth, documenting abuse, and building evidence of manipulation can literally save your life when dealing with people who prioritize money over basic human decency. My decision to start recording Mom's text messages and behavior patterns provided the evidence needed to expose their conspiracy and protect myself from further harm. Documentation became my weapon against gaslighting and my shield against continued abuse. For anyone currently experiencing family financial abuse, inheritance fraud, or exploitation by relatives motivated by greed, I want you to know that you're not alone, and that fighting back is possible even when the odds seem overwhelming. Start documenting everything, build your evidence carefully, and connect with professionals who specialize in these cases. The people who should love you most but choose to exploit you instead don't deserve your loyalty or protection. You deserve relationships built on respect and genuine care, and sometimes you have to walk away from toxic family connections to find the love and support you need to thrive. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate has taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us most also give us the strength to help others facing similar challenges. My family's betrayal was devastating, but it also revealed my own resilience and connected me with a community of survivors and advocates who are working to prevent others from experiencing similar abuse. Blood doesn't make family, love, respect, and mutual support create the relationships that truly matter in building a meaningful and fulfilling life. What happened to me could happen to anyone, but so can the recovery, the justice, and the transformation of trauma into purpose and positive change. If my story helps even one person recognize the warning signs of family financial abuse or gives someone the courage to fight back against exploitation by relatives, then something meaningful has come from the worst experience of my life. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give others is the truth about our own survival and the proof that escape and healing are possible even from the most devastating betrayals. Have you or someone you know ever experienced family financial abuse or inheritance fraud? Share your thoughts in the comments below about how we can better protect vulnerable people from exploitation by their own relatives. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories about overcoming family trauma and building healthy relationships. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the warning signs of family exploitation. Your share could literally save someone's life or inheritance. Thank you for listening to my story and supporting survivors of family abuse. Remember that you deserve relationships built on love and respect, and you have the right to protect yourself from anyone who chooses greed over genuine care, even if they're your own family members.